all read it, but the key component here is that even if the results of these studies are not as positive as many expect them to be, that we are only just beginning to appreciate the huge therapeutic potential of this family of compounds is clear. So for multiple sclerosis, for pain, for spasticity, for just a whole variety of neurologically related imbalances, the endocannabinoid system is how your body is trying to fix you. And if you're not being fixed, that means you need more. So the ideal medicine is often not the little purple pill that you see on TV or any of the other variety of things. In my mind, the first choice medicine should be cannabinoids when there's an indication for it, because they are mimicking what your body's doing. They regulate the endocrine system, and this is, again, a profound example here. Here they're given a compound that will kill the islet cells in your pancreas. In other words, create diabetes. And here you see the results indicate that delta-9 THC is capable of attenuating the severity of the autoimmune response in this experimental model of autoimmune diabetes. Again, free radicals are involved in all of this. You push a system too far, it collapses, causes cell death. You lose the ability to make insulin. You have high sugar levels. High sugar levels have a very important impact on how cells are capable of dying and how cells are able to be seen by the immune system. This is actually the type of work that I'm doing in the laboratory, which we will not go into. They regulate the immune system, and here it's quite profound. Just like we have CB1 receptors in our nervous system, we have CB2 receptors in our immune system. Every cell type in your immune system has cannabinoid receptors. Many of them are capable of making these endogenous cannabinoids. I will dispute what's commonly called the inhibition of the immune system by cannabinoids. Rather, it's the rebalancing of the immune system. Remember, everything is a balancing act. So one of them is pro-inflammatory, anti-inflammatory, one of those balancing acts. It turns out your immune system has two components to it. One component, regulated by a variety of pro-inflammatory cytokines, is pro-inflammatory. Another one is regulated by a different set of cytokines. It turns off the pro-inflammatory response. Well, the way your body balances naturally between those two systems is you go so far in one direction, and your body then starts to make cannabinoids to pull it back, because you don't want to get all those free radical damages when you don't need them. And if that doesn't satisfy the disease, then it bounces back again to the pro-inflammatory. And then the cannabinoids that your body makes pulls it back again. Well, all age-related autoimmune diseases seem to have an imbalance where in the tissue is imbalanced with excess cytokines of the pro-inflammatory type, such as was discussed for arthritis with tumor necrosis factor. But there's a variety of these compounds, IL-1, gamma interferon, that tend to promote that pro-inflammatory type of response, which often is associated then with degradation. For example, you get bone and cartilage degradation associated with arthritis. Whereas if you shift back into what's known as the Th2 cytokine profile, you can promote growth. Because everything, again, is a balance. Bones are being made, bones are being absorbed and broken down. The same is true of cartilage. The same is true of everything in your body. It's the balancing act that gets out of whack in a particular area, which manifests itself as a disease, which is dependent on the individual. Diseases are idiosyncratic in general. Not to say that they don't have their genetic and environmental relationship. That's what creates the idiosyncrasy. We're all different. So we see it regulates the reproductive system. You know, the uterus makes huge amounts of anandamide, but it has to be turned down for implantation. So that the uterus seems to be protecting itself in general until ovulation. And at ovulation, it has to turn down those endocannabinoids, otherwise you can't get implantation of the egg. And similarly, it regulates spermatogenesis. So that, yes, it's excess cannabinoid use could cause temporary infertility, either by preventing the development of the sperm or by preventing the implantation of the egg. But it's reversible, and it's how your body normally maintains these things. And certainly there are people who are imbalanced by having too many cannabinoids. And they're going to be infertile potentially. if that's what's happening in their uterus, if they're not turning down appropriately when they need to in order to have the implantation. High endocannabinoid levels are associated with spontaneous abortions. So, you know, there's two sides to every story, and it's through knowledge and education that we learn what to use, when to use it, how much to use it, and that's a very difficult thing because, again, we're all idiosyncratic. When you go and test a whole bunch of white males and you say this is the dose to take and you're giving it to, you know, a black woman, is it appropriate? You know, you spend $1 billion to do those trials. This is what it costs to get a drug on the market, is $1 billion. So it's a very difficult issue. As was mentioned, cannabinoids are in mother's milk. I would suggest that beyond just the regulation of appetite, that they have other important influences. The baby comes out and breathes air for the first time. Excess oxygen can cause brain damage. Well, the cannabinoids we know are neuroprotective. They're probably protecting against that. There's got to be stress when you're coming out of that birth canal, things that you might like to forget. You know, so, you know, forgetting aversive memories is very important. So, you know, we have a paradigm, the origins of a behavioral paradigm. Kids who were not nursed, whose mother's milk didn't satisfy those initial problems. You know, they're remembering trauma, etc. What consequence does that have in their life, in their mental development? I'll speculate on that in a moment. Here's something very, very important. People say, well, you know, you just use marijuana for relieving symptoms of cancer, for chemotherapy. Well, cannabinoids kill cancer cells. Because, see, cannabinoids are causing a biochemical change, an imbalance in themselves, right? Well, if the cell can't adapt to that change, the cell will die. And it turns out that a lot of cancer cells do not adapt to the biochemical change imposed on them by cannabinoid activity. So we see that breast cancer cells in tissue culture, colorectal cancer cells, glioma cells, leukemia cells, lymphoma cells, pheochromocytoma cells, prostate cancer, and skin cancer can all be killed in a variety of models, some cases human models. For example, currently the work of Manuel Guzman, he initially showed in mice and rats that you could kill glioma with THC. And we'll show you a couple of pictures of that in a second here. So here's the tumor. Here's the tumor with a cannabinoid. So these are tumors with and without different inhibitors to show which receptor was involved with. The next graph is a little more dramatic. Here's the tumor. They inject THC right into the tumor. And 3 days later, the tumor is gone. Here's the tumor again, a different picture. 3 days later, it's gone. This shows you that normal brain tissue is not affected. Because remember, brain tissue is protected by cannabinoids. It turns out it's specific for the cancers. And here you see that untreated mice, each little step in that first line is a mouse dying. And here you see when these mice are treated with THC or a synthetic compound WIN, that the mice die at a slower rate, and some of them actually survive. So Manuel Guzman currently has this in clinical human trials in Spain, where they're injecting THC into the brains of glioma patients. Glioma patients typically have 6 months to live. You know, we don't have a treatment. But he's only allowed to take the sickest of the sick, because otherwise, you know, they might get high. So now I want to transit into some of the implications of these things behaviorally. What do I got? 5. I go very quickly here. It turns out that it influences learning, behavior, and really all of the critical things. You know, our ability to learn new things is regulated. In this example here, you take mice, you put them in a maze, they freak out. It's a water maze. They swim, they find where the platform is, okay? You do that with wild-type mice, knockout mice. They both learn where the platform is. You take the platform and move it to a new place. The normal mice learn where that platform is immediately. They go and find it, and you put them back in the water, and they go right to the new platform. The knockout mice, they go back to the old place. They can't learn new things. They get too hardwired because they don't forget. So what we're seeing really in many respects is controlling anxiety, that if you're fearful, you can't look to the future with optimism. You're a pessimist. One of the side effects of cannabinoid use is people are optimistic, which means that they don't know what the future holds, but they're willing to deal with it. Whereas if you're pessimistic, you're fearful of the future and you look back. People that look back have a common vision, and they're much more likely to get into political power. And that's what